So hello, good morning. In the last class, we started talking about Indian Ocean, and I had told you that try and write a short note on the significance of Indian Ocean. The idea was very simple, that by doing these small exercises, you also learn to rely on your own writing. All right, that if you are given some information, you would be able to write on your own. For most of you, that is something that I think is required, so that's why the exercise. I hope you wrote. Right. So today what we are going to do is we generally need to understand Indian Ocean from India's perspective. What is it that India is doing and what is it that India says it would be doing. So that's the basic question that we have in mind to understand India's objectives in this region. So that is what we are going to do today. India and the Indian Ocean. So here we simply need to understand what is India's approach towards the Indian Ocean. What is India's approach? Or flowing from this approach, what kind of role is India playing or would India like to play in the Indian Ocean region? And then some challenges or limitations to India's approach or India's role or the capability of India in playing that role. And thereby, we would also see some examples of what India is doing, right? This is what we'll be doing in order for you to understand what to expect in the examination from this region, from the Indian Ocean region. Now, first and foremost, for this to be understood, you need to understand India's क्या समझने की जरूरत है? India's interests. Why is India interested in the Indian Ocean region? So some of this is fairly easy to understand. So if you have done any bit of effort, made any bit of effort in writing the significance of Indian Ocean region, you must have realized that Indian Ocean is significant because A, it is important in global trade and logistics. Global trade and logistics. All right, that means either presence of important ports or movement of east-west trade or trade between Pacific and the Atlantic or the Pacific. So that's the simple idea that you must have focused on. And then if you see, if you add strategic significance to it, Indian Ocean becomes important because of the presence of important, or let's say 4 important strategic accessways or choke points. I hope you will be able to identify it on the map, and if there is a question in the examination, and question would be simply where is it located, what does it connect. What are the 4 important strategic accessways that we talked about? We talked about Strait of Malacca, we talked about Strait of Hormuz, we talked about Bab al-Mandeb, and we talked about Suez Canal. है ना? यही किया था हमने. So then that is what makes it important. presence of these important strategic accessways, which then are important for a continuous flow of global trade, but which can also be affected by either a simple accident like a ship getting stuck, that would be of global significance, or more serious issues like tensions between two countries, for example, let's say Saudi Arabia and Iran. So Strait of Hormuz can be blocked, right? So the possibility is always there. So that's why Indian Ocean is important. Then Indian Ocean is important because of Indian Ocean basin is important in global hydrocarbons production, meaning a resource point, a point on resources, global hydrocarbon production. 40% and more of global hydrocarbon production, oil and gas production, is happening in the Indian Ocean basin. कहाँ पे? Where? For example, the Persian Gulf countries are rich in oil and gas, right? So 40% global reserves are there in this region. 40% of global production is happening, more than that, is happening in this particular region. So that's why it becomes important from the perspective of global energy security. And then you have the presence of mineral resources. The presence of mineral resources in the Indian Ocean region are of regional and global interest. Everybody is interested in it, be it regional coastal countries or be it global players in this particular field. So you have polymetallic nodules or placer deposits all available in the Indian Ocean region, rich sources of minerals, different kinds of minerals. So then that also says or tells you that Indian Ocean generally is of larger significance. What else? Fishing आप जोड़ लीजिएगा. Indian Ocean is not very significant in terms of global fishing. 70% of global fisheries catch is coming from the Pacific. But Indian Ocean is also important in some species, shrimp, tuna. So that's why it is of growing significance. So you can write it fishing also, but I've given you an idea that you talk about resources also. And then Indian Ocean connects multiple regions, cultures. So that's why it is of historic significance, cultural significance. It is a diverse region. Indian Ocean ultimately is a diverse region. And Indian Ocean is also significant Indian Ocean is also significant driver of climatic phenomenon such as monsoons. So of course these days in all the subjects El Nino Indian Ocean में इंडियन ओशन डायपोल को कभी कभी इंडियन ओशन एल नीनो कहते हैं, है ना, बट एल नीनो इज अ फेनोमेनन दैट यू विल फाइंड इन द पैसिफिक. चल रहा है, चलिए मैं आपकी बात मान लेता हूँ, बट आईआर के हिसाब से मुझे तो ज्योग्राफी का एक्सपर्ट बनना नहीं है, क्लाइमेट का ना मुझे एग्जाम देना है. मैं बस एक पॉइंट आपको बता रहा हूँ कि व्हेन यू आर राइटिंग ट्राई टू डाइवर्सिफाई So you can talk about climate also. That is what makes Indian Ocean important. So that's why in the efforts geared towards humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, Indian Ocean basin would be important or attractive to any important country. Any important country, if it wants to be important, would like to take care of such exigencies in the Indian Ocean. Sufficient points are there for writing about the significance of the Indian Ocean region. You may keep on adding examples, you may keep on adding based on your own understanding. देखने की जरूरत नहीं, बाद में देख लेना, especially as you are sitting right in front of me, है ना, एकदम मेरे आँख के सामने. तो I'm not disputing anything that you are saying. चलिए, so this is why Indian Ocean is significant, all right. Now, that gives you a simple idea of the global significance of Indian Ocean region. So that's where you can also develop an understanding of India's interests, right? So general significance of Indian Ocean, and deriving from general significance of Indian Ocean, you also derive India's interests. What are India's interests? First of all, India is centrally located. India is centrally located in the Indian Ocean region. Centrally located in the Indian Ocean region. This statement may have many implications. So, for example, more than 7,500 kilometers of coastline. So that means for India's coastal and maritime security, generally close to coast, we say coastal security, and as we start moving away from the coast, we start using the term maritime security. So Indian Ocean is important from the perspective of India's coastal and maritime security, meaning from the perspective of India's Coast Guard and India's Navy. All right. So Navy provides you the larger defense cover, and the Coast Guard is responsible for patrolling the coastal region of India, right? So coastal and maritime security concerns of all kinds, traditional, non-traditional, right? Thirdly, more than 90% of India's energy imports flow through, more than 90% of India's energy imports flow through the Indian Ocean region. So that means what? Indian Ocean is important for India's energy security. More than 90% of India's energy imports, hydrocarbon imports. Even in very simple terms, if we import other energy sources, और कोई एनर्जी सोर्स हम इंपोर्ट करते हैं, कोल भी इंपोर्ट करते हैं हम, ऑल राइट, वी इंपोर्ट कोल फ्रॉम कंट्रीज लाइक ऑस्ट्रेलिया और इंडोनेशिया. तो एज यू स्टार्ट प्रिपेयरिंग एंड एज यू मूव towards better preparation, you will understand that in recent times there have been debates about AR thermal power plants facing fuel shortage, है ना. भारत में क्या क्या चल रहा है आजकल? एक तो भारत जोड़ो यात्रा चल रही है, देखो हंसना सबसे पहले जरूरी है, वेरी गुड, हेल्थ के लिए अच्छा है. पर और क्या चल रहा है? एज यूपीएससी एस्पिरेंट, व्हाट वुड बी यू बी इंटरेस्टेड इन? एनीथिंग एंड एवरीथिंग अबाउट इंडिया इज इंपॉर्टेंट. ऑल राइट, चलिए. सो जनरली वी अंडरस्टैंड दैट वी हैव रिच रिसोर्सेस ऑफ एनर्जी, बट वी ऑल्सो इम्पोर्ट. हाइड्रोकार्बन्स में वी आर नॉट सेल्फ डिपेंडेंट. हाइड्रोकार्बन we import, and we will keep on importing unless we develop by some miracle the capability to move to renewable energy sources, है ना. But in the foreseeable future, India would remain world's among the largest importers of energy resources in the world. So that's why this flow in the Indian Ocean region would be important. So this is significance from the perspective of energy security, right? Again, over 90% of India's outbound trade, right, either short-term trade or containerized traffic. Cumulatively, 90% of the trade flow involving India is through the Indian Ocean. So that is clearly a point that makes you aware of the fact that it is economically important. It is important from economic security perspective. So coastal and maritime security, energy security of India, as well as trade security of India is dependent on security of Indian Ocean region. Fifthly, the fact that monsoon is a dominant climatic and thereby social and economic or socio-economic factor in India makes the Indian Ocean important for India. Right? We generally always, when we are looking at economic data in India, we wait for the post-monsoon period. We make an assessment. इस साल बारिश कैसी हुई और इस साल खेती कैसी रही. Right? Because we always link this with quarterly economic performance. Right? If monsoons are good, then agricultural season is good, then it means the rest of the economy would be doing better. That is one of the indicators generally if you read economic newspapers, they would be talking about. All right. So that's why monsoon affects not only the climatic conditions in India, but also social and economic conditions in India. Droughts, right, may be a social phenomenon apart from economic and climatic phenomenon. Right. Drought कैसे social phenomenon है? कोई बताएगा? How may drought be a social phenomenon? Of course, it is a climatic phenomenon, but how is it also a social phenomenon? Huh? Of course, I understand it influences social aspects, but that is the question that I asked. How? Women are dependent on fetching water, right? Okay, good point. So, if there is drought, generally in India, the largest employer has been agricultural sector. If there is drought in any particular season, we understand that it may induce what is called distress migration. Laborers who don't find work would have to move away from their homes. So migration, for example, is a social phenomenon. All right. And then we simply start talking about feminization of poverty, right? Feminization of poverty, feminization of agriculture. So all these can be linked, right? If you have a sense that how to link them, not making an unnecessary connection, but correlation, right? So that is why Indian Ocean is important. Indian Ocean for India is also a strategic bridge. Indian Ocean is also a strategic bridge for connecting with countries in the immediate and extended neighborhood. Countries in the immediate and the extended neighborhood. So it is a strategic bridge for us. It is one geographic feature that connects India with Africa, connects India with West Asia, connects India with Southeast Asia. समझ में आ गई आपको बात? So that's why sometimes it is referred to as a strategic bridge that connects India with multiple regions. So I hope these 6 points would be enough for giving you a sense of what are India's interests in the Indian Ocean region. And these are nothing but, in simple terms, political diplomatic interest. If you have countries in this region with whom you want cooperation, of course there would be engagement process, there would be visits. Economic significance, trade is flowing through this region, so trade relations are modulated, trade interests are modulated by what is happening in the Indian Ocean region, and that's why India would be interested that Strait of Hormuz remains open, right? Suez Canal remains open. These are far away regions from India, but they affect India's interest directly or indirectly. So economic interest and energy interest, that is a no-brainer. A growing country like India would, for the foreseeable future, be an importer of energy resources, right? We will be importing energy resources, and these energy resources would be traveling through the Indian Ocean region. So energy. And then you may add other factors, other social, historical, and climatic factors. So all of this means that India needs to have a consolidated approach towards the Indian Ocean region. इसकी ज़रूरत है. So then India's approach can be defined through a major foreign policy formulation which has been in vogue in recent times. Security and growth for all in the region in 2015. Before that, in the past, in the Cold War period, India was always aware of its centrality in the Indian Ocean region. So India always advocated that Indian Ocean remains free from any external influence. That is what India advocated in the Cold War period, that Indian Ocean remains free from any external influence. And there was also an idea that Indian Ocean be a zone of peace. So that is how India articulated its interest in the Cold War period, right? And articulation is in the context of what was happening at that point in time. That Indian Ocean remains free of external influence, meaning does not become a theater of great power politics, and thereby certain idea of Indian Ocean being a zone of peace. That is what India stood for. Then in the post-Cold War period, what happened? So post-Cold War period, you will see that there is generally an opening up of India, right? जिसको आप LPG कहते हैं. So when you are opening up, what would happen? You would automatically become outward oriented. All right? Your trade increases, your energy imports increase. So thereby the significance of the Indian Ocean is renewed in India's view. That if India expands its economic interests, its energy interests, Indian Ocean would be important. And then India needs to take a lead in terms of building mechanisms of cooperation in this region, right? Simply advocating it being a zone of peace or simply calling for non-interference of external powers in this region is not sufficient. What we need to do is we need to now build a conception of our interest and also build such friendly relations which ensures India's energy and trade security in the long term, right? And then gradually you would see the security focus comes in as we find that being central to the Indian Ocean region, we need to develop our capabilities, power projection capabilities. So India has a certain desire of becoming a blue water navy. ये term आप बहुत सुनते होंगे, blue water navy. So blue water navy is a very simple idea, a navy capable of projecting power or operating far away from its shores. That is a blue water navy. Blue water is a reference to deep waters, right? So all the countries have some sort of naval forces, but only few countries are capable of operating far away from their home in the deep waters, right? For example, US, India also has aircraft carriers and larger ships. China, right? Very few countries can be called truly blue water. In fact, we can only, in any true sense, call the US a truly blue water navy, right? So that is the idea also that is there. The Navy thinks that it needs to develop capabilities to project power and to defend India's interests across the Indian Ocean region. It's a vast region. So that is also an addition to why India wants to become further active in this region. Now, we also see that, for example, in 1992, Mumbai had faced terrorist bombings. So we realize that unless our coasts are safe, coasts are generally vulnerable, they are open. Unless our coasts are safe, we will face internal security issues also. So Mumbai terrorist bombings had a link with the ocean. And 2008, Mumbai terrorist attacks, right? 26/11. That also had a link with the ocean because the attackers came through the coasts. So through these, you can understand the consolidation of India's approach towards Indian Ocean region, right? This is how efforts have been made to consolidate India's approach towards the region, right? Liberalization period, trade, energy interest, and then a larger understanding, naval understanding that for defending India's interest, you need naval capability, become blue water navy. So there is a certain development of thought in the navy. And then there is a certain development thought in the security circles that India's internal security challenges are linked with India's coastal security. So thereby, we have come to a stage where we consolidated our vision on India's role in Indian Ocean or India's approach in Indian Ocean through Sagar. What is Sagar? Sagar is a Hindi word of Sanskrit origin, which means simply the oceans, right? That's first thing. Secondly, Sagar is an acronym for security and growth for all in the region. Security and growth for all in the region. So generally, these kinds of ideas are mentioned in speeches and we then are left to make meaning out of it. So we try and understand it through how government has responded in the parliament or how in further speeches it has been defined. So largely you can call Sagar a vision, a larger vision that India has towards the Indian Ocean region, defining India's approach. So first of all, the first focus of Sagar approach is enhancing India's coastal and maritime security. So securing India's coasts and securing India's maritime interests. That is the first feature of Sagar. That is the first. So we always start with ourselves. And then enhancing engagements and collaboration, enhancing engagements and collaboration with the Indian Ocean region countries. We generally start calling it IOR, a reference to Indian Ocean region. So enhancing engagements and collaboration with the Indian Ocean region countries. For what? A, for sustainable development or sustainable development is a general term. When we start applying it in the oceans, it becomes or for the development of blue economy. So blue economy simply means using the resources of the ocean for sustainable economic development while also conserving and preserving marine ecosystem, right? So combining economic development, economic growth as a goal using oceans resources plus the concern for ecological preservation. That is basically the idea of blue economy. So for sustainable development, blue economy, and also for meeting maritime security challenges, which is what? Which can be traditional. So traditional security challenges are traditional traditional security challenge. Piracy, non-traditional security. Traditional security challenges would always be challenges coming from states. All right? Naval competition, warfare. अगर ऐसी कोई सिचुएशन है वो ट्रेडिशनल सिक्योरिटी चैलेंज है, राइट? इन बहुत ही सिंपल टर्म्स में लिख देता हूँ, वॉर्स वो ट्रेडिशनल सिक्योरिटी चैलेंज है. सिक्योरिटी चैलेंजेस पोज्ड बाय स्टेट्स और कंपटीशन बिटवीन स्टेट्स. और non-traditional simply then is a reference to security challenges posed by non-state actors, non-traditional. So you would have terrorism or piracy, crimes against ships, or you can also say emerging challenges. Now emerging challenges, we generally refer to them these days as hybrid challenges, because challenges are not simply coming through state and non-state sources. ये distinction clear नहीं है, पर इसके अलावा it is coming from multiple sources. So natural disasters also pose a security challenge. Pandemics are also security challenge. Climate change is also a security challenge or a source of security challenge. So collaboration and cooperation with coastal countries to meet the needs of combating or ensuring, let's say, ensuring safety from maritime security challenges or dealing with maritime security challenge, which can be traditional, which is wars or strategic competition between states, all right, or non-traditional, which is non-state actors like terrorism or piracy, or emerging challenges, disasters, pandemics, challenges related with climate change. All of them have to be met with cooperation, all right? And then ultimately it is also about deepening regional integration and cooperation. Regional integration meaning working through organizations, not only working with countries but also working through organizations. Deepening regional integration and cooperation in the IOR through strengthening of groupings like IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. So that is what India wants in the Indian Ocean region, right? And then these elements of cooperation have to be driven by certain rules, right? Cooperation is necessary, but cooperation has to be driven by certain rules. What kind of rules? So India, through its Sagar approach, advocates for peaceful resolution of disputes. This would be one point which would be ever present in whatever India is doing, right? India advocates peaceful resolution of disputes in the region, and India advocates a rules based order to ensure safety of sea lanes of communication, and trade routes. So there are certain fundamental freedoms which are available to all countries in the ocean, because ocean is not controlled by any single country. So India says, such being the case, the region would become stable if countries adopt peaceful ways of resolving their disputes, and region would become stable if countries adopt a rules-based way of doing so, and also a rules-based way of governing how they use salience of communication or trade routes. So generally these last 2 points are more relevant in the context of what China is doing in the Indian Ocean region, or also we will see these are articulated as part of India's Indo-Pacific approach also. India in the Indo-Pacific argues for a rules-based order. So this is the best meaning that in a very simplified form that we can make of the Sagar approach. Ultimately, as the name suggests, it is about security and growth for all in the region, right? So then it means security for India, growth for India, but also security for others, growth for others, and thereby cooperation of various kinds in this region. This is what India wants to promote as part of Sagar approach in the Indian Ocean region. Right. Now moving on, we said that largely what is India's approach? So this is what India's approach is, a certain collective approach of ensuring its own security. Now we can also then identify India's role flowing from its approach. India wants to be a regional leader in ensuring a consolidated and stable cooperative framework in this region. And another identified role associated with India and flowing from Sagar approach, but preceding Sagar approach, and now in many ways a role on which the success of India's Sagar approach depends, right, is the role of net security provider. We generally hear that India is a net security provider, or India is ready to be a net security provider, or India wants to be a net security provider, or other wants India to be net security provider. So this is a term that has been used a lot since the last 2 decades, right? 2000s. So the US in its document started saying that India, it looks forward to India being the provider of net security in this region. तो दूसरे हमारी तारीफ करते हैं, हमको अच्छा लगता है, ऑलराइट, आज भी अच्छा लगता है, कल भी अच्छा लगता था. We don't change in that sense. दूसरे हमारी बुराई करते हैं तो बुरा लगता है, ऑलराइट. So that is something that we see has become an accepted part of India's own thinking, that yes, we are a large country, we are a regional leader, this region is important from global and regional perspective. So then if we play a leading role, it would serve our own purpose, it would serve the purpose of our leadership, right? So it is related with what we want to become. So the idea of net security provider simply is that of a country which is capable of assessing the existing security scenario in the region surrounding it. Existing security scenario needs to be adequately assessed. So it's all about capacity. Secondly, assessing the availability of security options in the region. What security options are available? Which are the important countries? What capabilities do they have? Our own assessment, what capabilities do we have? And then making a judgment on what kind of role, what kind of support we can provide to the region. So assessment of the entire security scenario, assessment of security gap, and then assessment of one's own capabilities and preparedness to provide for that security gap, or fulfilling the role of net security provider by bridging that security gap, right? In other words, it means ensuring mutual security of more than one country in a region. Right? In very simple terms, this is what it means. That a net security provider is one which is not only capable of ensuring its own security, but also that of others. Right? Ensuring mutual security of more than one country in the region, in very simple terms. Right? Now, this ability is not only against traditional security threats, but also against non-traditional and emerging threats. So that is the role of a net security provider, ensuring mutual security of more than one countries against traditional security threats as well as non-traditional and emerging threats. So that is basically a matter of capability. Are you capable of doing so? So that simply can be seen in the size of India's navy, or whatever India is doing to secure itself creates a surplus capacity through which India can help others as well. है ना, जो हम अपने लिए कर रहे हैं वो औरों के काम भी आ सकता है. It does not mean becoming a police officer of the region कि only I will provide the security. It is about mutual security. All right, it is about some other countries have some capabilities. What are the gaps in their capabilities which we can fill through our capabilities? So it is not the idea of alliance, it is not the idea of domination, it is the idea of cooperation, partnership. How can we help others in capacity building? So as you could see, it is closely related with and then strengthens the Sagar approach also. Generally, the role of a net security provider, if a country has to become a net security provider, if India has to become net security provider in this region, involves steps like military diplomacy, steps like help in capacity building, involves steps like military exercises, involves steps like direct deployment of forces. Direct deployment of forces. That is the kind of role that you would see. That for being a net security provider, these are the kinds of roles which a country needs to perform. Military diplomacy would mean, for example, recently India's military chief, army chief, General Manoj Pandey, visited Nepal. So these are very regular parts of what countries do to promote engagement between militaries, visits, diplomatic visits, all right. So military diplomacy or deployment of military attaches. So generally you will find that in embassies and consulates abroad, you will have somebody from the military deployed or attached, right? So that is military diplomacy. Visits, collaborations, partnerships, conferences, especially engagement between the military leadership. Generally this is visible. India-Nepal case was easier to explain, but this is something that keeps on happening, right? There are not only ministerial visits or secretarial visits, but also members of armed forces visit each other. Capacity building can take the role of training, and it can take the role of supplying military or defense equipment. This is what it would mean, right? Either you train others or you provide them equipments. Do we have any examples from whatever we have done so far? Yes, we have examples from Sri Lanka, Maldives, providing military equipment like Dornier aircraft or amphibious assault vehicle, or deployment of coastal surveillance radar systems. ये एग्जाम्पल है हमारे पास. Training to Bhutan, training earlier in a limited way to members of armed forces of Afghanistan, training to members of armed forces of Nepal, but generally also providing training support to other countries. Right? Our training institutions are sought after. So this is something that India does on a fairly regular basis. So good that you are able to identify examples from what we have done. Military exercises, fair number of examples you already know. Corpat with Bangladesh, all right, Slinex with Sri Lanka, but also many other exercises. For example, India hosts an exercise at the multilateral level called the Milan exercise. Milan is a multilateral exercise. अभी हुआ, इस साल हुआ था क्या? Milan is a multilateral exercise. It takes place every 2 years. So it took place this year also. So if you are simply following current affairs newspaper, you must have come across it in the month of February, March. Milan, multilateral exercise, meaning we invite multiple countries, right? Multiple countries to participate in this kind of a naval exercise. This is a larger, relevant exercise, not particular to any particular country, not particular to any single country. It is a multilateral exercise. It's a biennial exercise. All right? It's a biennial exercise, which means it takes place once in 2 years, right? Biannual and biennial, right? So then, this is another thing that we conduct, do direct deployment. Do we have any example of direct deployment? Huh? Do we have any examples of direct deployment? एक एक करके. Please raise your hands and then speak. It would be easier for me. और आप बोलेंगे तो मैं कन्वे भी कर पाऊंगा जो ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स हैं उनको. श्रीलंका एंड मॉलडीव्स, थोड़ा डिटेल में बताएं. We deployed IPKF, Indian Peacekeeping Forces in Sri Lanka. We deployed the armed forces for a shorter period to help Maldives in Operation Cactus. वो direct deployment है. And of course, military involvement in Bangladesh is another example, right? So deployment, direct deployment is also an example, but this is one thing where we generally are not very comfortable. Direct deployment can be for the purpose of rescuing one's own citizens. ऐसा कोई एग्जाम्पल है? one's own citizens in case of any external crisis. ये सबसे obvious cause हो जाता है direct deployment का. सबसे easy है to take a decision when Indians are involved, right? During the pandemic, वंदे भारत मिशन, इस तरह की चीज़ें हम करते हैं तो जनरली हम मिलिट्री वेसल्स का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, मिलिट्री प्लेन्स का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, राइट? एक एग्जाम्पल जो इंडियन ओशन से नहीं है लेकिन वो भी एक एग्जाम्पल है, ऑपरेशन गंगा या ऑपरेशन देवी शक्ति. ये डायरेक्ट डिप्लॉयमेंट ऑफ आर असेट्स हो जाता है, नॉट नेसेसरीली मिलिट्री, ऑल राइट. पर यहाँ पे इंडियन ओशन में बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल हैं, जैसे ऑपरेशन राहत in Yemen, Operation Rahat in Yemen. All right, 2015, Yemen witnessed worsening of civil war situation. India rescued around 15,000 of its citizens from Yemen by deploying its naval ships. Right? In many of the pandemic related evacuation also military ships were used. So that is direct deployment of military assets. You have other examples also. For example, during the evacuation of Indians from the Gulf War situation, 1990-91. तो यहाँ पे आसान हो जाता है deployment. It may be for defending self-defined interests abroad, right? That we intervene on matters of foreign policy. Generally ये देखने को नहीं मिलेगा, right? So for example, people kept on arguing that India should intervene in Afghanistan. Generally this is something that we would not find. India is not United States. Generally this is something that you will find with United States. United States intervenes to define its own self-defined or to defend its self-defined foreign policy goals. All right? And direct deployment to assist other countries in crisis. ये देखने को मिल जाएगा. Right? So IPKF एक तरह से हो सकता है कि to defend self-defined interests हो सकता है ना? To bring peace in the region. But generally, in two cases, assisting other countries in crisis and rescuing one's own citizens in scenarios of instability, war, regional crisis, there is direct deployment. Assisting other countries in crisis, so water diplomacy with Maldives, right? Post-tsunami, rescue relief, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations. यहाँ पे हम directly अपने military asset deploy करते हैं. But generally understand that India's constitution itself defines foreign policy in a very pacifist way. है ना? कौन सा article Indian constitution का? 51A. So generally it talks about हाथ सोच रहे हैं, बोल रहे हैं, बता रहे हैं. आपने ही बताया 51A, मैंने बता दिया लोगों को. अब आप रिवाइज करना चाहते हैं, रिवाइज कर लें. जल्दी में थे. इधर से धीरे से 50 आया. 50 तो 50 जब इन्होंने 51 कहा तो इन्होंने पूरा कर दिया. Generally, our constitution says that foreign policy should be for the purpose of promoting amity, peace. Resolution of disputes should be peaceful. 1. 2. Freedom struggle. The values that we derived from freedom struggle, generally dominant values were of peace. All right? Unless you start going into ye hota to kya hota, that is the value that generally we derived. And thereby, we have been reluctant in this last option, right? We don't generally prefer direct deployment of forces, saving some extreme conditions, all right? So generally this is where we are weak. We will find some examples in terms of military exercises, we will find examples in terms of military diplomacy, capacity building, training, we will find many examples. Supplying military equipment, we will find limited examples, because for supplying military equipment, हाँ मुझे पता है, यहाँ भी मुझे बता दिया जाता है, और भी लोग हैं. चलिए, मैं बहुत सारी चीज़ें आपको एक इंडिकेशन देके इसलिए छोड़ देता हूँ, बिकॉज आई वॉन्ट यू टू अप्लाई योर एफर्ट, है ना? जैसे लॉक कहता है, एनीथिंग दैट यू अप्लाई योर लेबर टू बिकम्स योर प्रॉपर्टी. ऑल राइट? So that is my formula for doing things, right? Otherwise I also have Google. You should exercise your brain in such a way that first, always think before speaking. Are you sure? Are you not sure? If you are not sure, always make it clear that I am not sure, right? And this would come handy when you go for interviews. Interview में अगर ये आदत रही कि आपने मुंह खोला और जो मन में आया वो बोला, तो वहाँ पे मुश्किल हो जाती है ना? ये बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. I have observed this. The biggest and the most common problem that people have is they don't understand that it is a conversation. Interview is a conversation. So if somebody is asking you a question, let them complete. Then have at least a second's pause, gap between their completion and you start to speak. But most of the times, what happens is the other person is asking the question, you get excited, कि ये तो मेरे zone में आ गया, this is in my zone, now I will answer, and you start answering. Without understanding that it is about basic etiquette, it is about presence, it is about personality. ये क्यों आती है आदत? It's not your fault, it is a fault of this examination, right? Because this examination gives you the burden of knowing everything. So by the time you reach to the interview, you go with the conception that I will answer each and every question, wherein many of the toppers have not answered many questions in the interview, have clearly said a no. Right. Could you please brief defending self-defined interest abroad? Defending self-defined interest can mean a lot of things. So for example, the US defined the Arabian oil to be its national interest. That if there is any intervention in the Arabian Peninsula, the US would use military force. So that is one meaning of self-defined interest. क्या कि तेल किसी और का लेकिन वो मेरा इंटरेस्ट है. अगर वहां पे कोई और आता है कोई और चीज होती है तो मैं इंटरवीन करूंगा. I will intervene. So that is what the Americans did in the 1930s. They started looking at this oil resource in the Arabian Peninsula with interest. And then after that, in their successive national security documents, they started defining it as their strategic interests. And they warned other countries, if this strategic interest is harmed, they would intervene militarily. That is one example of defending self-defined interests abroad. So generally, we don't have such examples from Indian history. So you will not find any examples here, right? But this is one example of how you or why you deploy forces. Why you deploy forces, right? 3 ways in which you can deploy forces. IPKF can be a limited example of deploying Indian forces abroad to defend self-defined interests. What was our self-defined interest? Regional leadership, solving regional crisis which was affecting India. So that can be one limited example of deploying forces abroad for defending self-defined interests. All right? चलिए आगे चलते हैं. So that is the idea of net security provider. You understand that by and large, India has the capability, India keeps on doing it, and India needs to work on it continuously. It's never a complete process. So we understood India's larger approach through the Sagar approach, Sagar vision. That is what India wants to do in the region. And we understood that a specific part of what India wants to do is described as its role as a net security provider. So we made sense of what would be a net security provider by a simple definition, as simple as it could be, and then breaking it down into the components. What kind of role you would see a net security provider performing in a region. So remember, these are not scientific categories, right? These are always unfolding, developing. So the definition is only for the simple purpose of describing it as briefly as possible. It is not possible to define it exactly what it is, but you can sufficiently describe it through this definition and these kinds of roles. So now what are the challenges to India's vision of Sagar or to India's role as a net security provider in the region? All right, what is it that you will see as challenges? Number one, you have contentious issues such as maritime boundary disputes. So fortunately, with any of our neighbors, we only have a disputed maritime boundary with Pakistan. Pakistan can also be seen as constituting a traditional threat to India's interests. Second, increasing interest and presence of China in the Indian Ocean region, or IOR. That is the second prominent challenge that you have. All right, presence of China is increasing. China is increasingly interested in the Indian Ocean region. So that is another challenge that India would have to contend with. Because now there is another player in the town which is saying, or which may be saying, that why only India? We are also here. All right. So that poses a challenge to India's influence, India's approach, India's role, right? So increasing interest and presence of China in the Indian Ocean region poses a direct strategic threat to India, direct security threat to India, but also threat to India's regional leadership, also threat to India's regional leadership, right? And then the third is we can say that governance in oceans or governance in maritime sphere, governance in maritime sphere requires multilateral, collaborative action, meaning you can't do it on your own. So thereby another challenge that India would have to contend with is the weakness of regional initiatives, meaning India's own track record in leading regional initiatives is not very impressive, be it SAARC or BIMSTEC or IORA. So governance in the oceans or establishing a rules-based order or promoting larger cooperation necessarily is a collective effort. It cannot be a singular effort by one country. So then it means that what is required is stronger regional institutions, success of regionalism. So weakness of regional initiatives needs to be addressed. ये हम कह सकते हैं in simple terms. First part is only to explain to you that in oceans we generally would require cooperation. The challenge is weakness of regional initiatives, and the solution is it needs to be addressed, right? So many examples. SAARC is certainly not a success. BIMSTEC has potential but still not a success. IORA has existed for a very long time, but we need to bring focus to it. So these initiatives would always require focus. All right, these initiatives would always require focus, right? And then what India's own capacity needs shoring up, needs building up, right? You would be only as effective as you are in terms of your capabilities. So you can have intentions, you can be a very good man or good woman, good person. Intentions are there, but capability is not there. What will you do? So in the past, we had a sort of idealistic foreign policy. You cannot say that any foreign policy is simply idealistic, but we generally say that our foreign policy was idealistic. Our weakness was that we didn't have material capabilities. We were a poor country. So then we started focusing on 5-year plans, agricultural revolution, green revolution, right? Creation of institutions like IITs or ISRO or DRDO, so that we have material capabilities. Now, in the span of years, we have reached to a place where we have distinct, visible capabilities. But still we are far behind certain other countries or far behind the requirement. So that's a continuous process. India's own capacity needs shoring up. Capacity in terms of what? So then, what needs to be done? So what needs to be done? What needs to be done should be simple. So first of all, India needs to focus on indigenizing defense manufacturing. And that's something that you will see is behind successive defense production policies. Successive defense production policies. Most recent iteration was in 2020. Right? So that's why you will find changes in categories like Make in India, Buy in India. Right? So what is written after needs? Where is needs? Needs shoring up. All right? Shoring up, needs strengthening. कुछ चीजें आप obviously भी समझ जाएं, ये कोई technical word नहीं है, right? So if there is capacity, it needs strengthening. That is what has been written. Needs strengthening, needs shoring up. So indigenized defense manufacturing, that's one requirement, and that is consistently visible. Last 20 years, we have seen efforts in this direction. Indigenize as much as possible. Start producing as much as possible. So that's why you would see we planned Vikrant way back in the 1990s. Right? Because that is something that has been the objective of this country. We understand that you cannot become a great power by remaining import dependent in defense equipments. This is understood to be a long-term process. It is not going to happen in one day. All right? So then, in the meantime, diversify sources of defense imports, right? Diversify sources of defense imports. It is important that you simultaneously work on it. It would not happen that one day you will wake up and you will have a self-sufficiency in defense production. All right? So, till that happens, don't remain dependent on any one supplier. As is very clear right now. When Russia is in trouble, we have to think about how do we balance our relations with other countries. Because traditionally we have been dependent on Russia. So diversify sources of defense imports. So we have now an increasing list of countries from whom we buy. Israel, France, USA, most importantly in recent times. Right? These are the countries that we are buying from. But we can acquire certain capabilities from Japan, we can acquire certain capabilities from UK in the future. So we need to keep on working on these capabilities, diversify sources of defense. Then what we need to do is, we need to come up with a comprehensive maritime policy, comprehensive maritime policy, which means managing the affairs of the oceans is not only the task of the Navy. So we have naval documents, right? Indian Navy from time to time issues Indian Maritime Security Strategy, IMSS documents. Last one it had issued in 2015. If you read your class material, you will find a mention of it. So Indian Navy continuously issues Indian Maritime Security Strategy document. But what we require is a comprehensive maritime policy, which means not only defining interests and approach in the ocean through naval perspective, but also through diverse perspective, right? So we generally nowadays say that this require all of government approach, meaning a policy that has input and stakes from Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Shipping more importantly, and also states, coastal states, all right? So that is what we are talking about. India needs to have a comprehensive maritime policy. India needs to define its approach towards larger oceans. India needs to define how it is going to achieve the goals that it has defined, right? Which are the important stakeholders. So that is something that you will see again, we are moving in that direction. This year what has happened? In this year's is there something significant that has happened in this context? Huh? 2+2 meeting. India, has India done something? सिक्योरिटी हो गया आपका? अच्छा, कोई बात नहीं, लेकिन करंट अफेयर्स पढ़ने में दिक्कत आती है. So India has appointed National Maritime Security Coordinator. All right? हुआ है ऐसा? National Maritime Security Coordinator has been appointed by government under the National Security Council. ऐसा हुआ है? So this is basically moving in that particular direction. So broadly we need to work on these three things. More importantly, indigenized defense manufacturing to shore up, related with what we had identified as a weakness, to shore up or to strengthen India's capacity. Right? It would help India in capacity building of other countries, not only defending its own interests but capacity building of other countries. So it would help India in its role as net security provider. Diversify sources of defense imports. That again is indicative of the first purpose itself. And having a comprehensive maritime policy, then India would be able to make better assessment of what its capabilities are and which stakeholders can be important, are going to play an important role in promoting India's approach of सागर. ये तीन चीजें इंडिया को करनी चाहिए. तो अब थोड़ा बहुत देख लेते हैं कि इंडिया क्या कर रहा है. राइट? सो व्हाट इज इट इंडिया डूइंग? सो ए वी सी दैट number of exercises are increasing. Right? So you can make, if you want to add, जो अगला सवाल आप पूछते हैं क्या ये लिख सकते हैं? बिल्कुल लिख सकते हैं. India needs to conduct more number of exercises. India needs to strengthen regional initiatives like IORA और IONS. ये करने की जरूरत है. India needs to partner with like-minded countries with capabilities in the Indian Ocean region. ये सारी चीजें भी आप लिख सकते हैं इसमें. Right? चलिए इंडिया क्या कर रहा है? Exercises. So you have examples of an exercise like Milan. It's a multilateral biennial exercise, happened in 2022, for example. Then you have example of an exercise called Malabar. Malabar exercise involves India, US and Japan. So Malabar exercise earlier started in 1992 between India and US, and Japan became a participant, permanent participant in 2015. Malabar exercise. Right? And then in recent times, for example 2021, we have started an exercise with UAE called Zayed Talwar. Right? Exercise with UAE, Zayed Talwar. Right? And then we are also committed to start exercising with Saudi Arabia. We have started exercising with Saudi Arabia also. Right? And then you have a long-standing, very old exercise since 1993 called Nasim al-Bahr with Oman. Right? So we have old exercises, newer exercises are coming up. And this would be part of a continuous process. We have multilateral exercises, we have trilateral exercises, naval exercises mainly. So these are the exercises that would continue. It is not a permanent participant of Malabar exercise. I said permanently कौन participate करता है. Right? So that's why I gave you an idea. It started with India and US, and then Japan became a permanent participant in 2015. And I hope in this class or in some class, somebody had asked me a question on Quad or military exercise. Somebody had asked me a question. So I had mentioned, what did I mention? That somebody had asked me a question on exercises also. तो मैंने आपको बताया था कि sometimes it is also about signaling. 2020, Australia also participated in the Malabar exercise, so it was then referred to as Quad exercise, right? So Australia yet not is a permanent participant, but we invite अंडरस्टैंड, हर पॉइंट का एक पर्टिकुलर कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मतलब है। ये एग्जांपल्स है किस तरह के एक्सरसाइज है। मल्टी मिलन, लार्जर फॉर्म ऑफ एक्सरसाइज, मल्टीलैटरल एक्सरसाइज। Malabar with particular kinds of countries, trilateral exercise. Zayed Talwar, a newer exercise with a country with which we didn't have these kinds of exercises, but now we have started Zayed Talwar with UAE, right? Saudi Arabia, I am forgetting the name, but Saudi Arabia also we have started an exercise, right? Nasim al Bahar is an old exercise with a country in the Indian Ocean region, right? So that's the example of what India is doing. Similarly, if you see, we have partnerships or joint vision for cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. So partnership and joint vision with, in our relationship with USA, we have talked about cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. In our cooperation with France, we have talked about cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. In our cooperation with Japan, in our cooperation with Australia, we have talked about partnership or joint vision. So these are countries which are not necessarily Indian Ocean countries. USA, Japan, not necessarily Indian Ocean country. Australia is far away from the perspective of India, right? France has smaller islands like Reunion in the Indian Ocean region, but they are capable countries. So we have joint visions or partnerships with these countries in which cooperation in Indian Ocean region figures. And then you have some form of logistics cooperation. Logistics cooperation. Meaning we have agreements whereby we have offered logistic support to other countries. They can use our port facilities, our military bases for limited purposes. We can use theirs, right? So this is where you will find, I have given you already the examples when we were talking about China, right? Dukma port in Oman. Similarly, we have Sabang port, Indonesia, right? These are some of the locations. But we have logistics agreement with USA, with France, with Australia, with Japan, right? So these are relevant in the context of Indian Ocean, USA, France, Australia, right? But we have large number of now growing logistics agreements, logistics support agreement, which simply means if there is an exercise, if the purpose is refueling, recreation, repair, we offer our bases to them, not for fighting war, but for certain purposes, refueling, recreation, all right? And this is a growing form of cooperation which may take deeper meaning in the future, but right now it is limited, but logistics cooperation is there. And then you have certain places where India has infrastructure investments, where चाबहार सबको याद आ जाता है, all right? चाबहार in Iran. What else? Now tell me. Mauritius में, मॉरिशियस में क्लास मटेरियल खोल के बैठे हैं आप, बताइए, कल भी मैंने मेंशन किया था. You can answer this question on the basis of either looking at simply the class material, Mauritius, Seychelles, Agalega Islands, and Assumption Islands. Here we have presence in terms of infrastructure investment in the Indian Ocean region. Then we have certain military logistics in cooperation with other countries. For example, listening posts in Madagascar. All right, listening post in Madagascar, and a series of network of coastal surveillance radars across Indian Ocean region. Coastal surveillance radars. We have helped countries in developing coastal surveillance radar. So, close to India, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka, then also Mauritius, then also Seychelles. All right, ये हमने किया है. So this also is part of our preparedness, our cooperation. Similarly, we have agreements like White Shipping Agreement, which is merchant shipping agreement with countries like Maldives. We share information on the movement of ships in the Indian Ocean region. Similarly, we have developed, Indian Navy has developed the Information Fusion Center of the IOR region. It is located at Gurugram. So it became operational in 2018. Now, Indian Navy, through various inputs, satellites, coastal surveillance radars, or presence of its own ships, keeps an eye on the movement of ships in the Indian Ocean region. So that is the information that it has. Now, Information Fusion Center is about cooperation with other countries in the region. We exchange information, collaborate with other countries in exchange of information on a real-time basis in this region. So, Information Fusion Center located at Gurugram, headquartered at Gurugram, operated by Indian Navy. This is another part of India's capability, the capability that we have in this region. Now, we go for a break, and after the break, we come back and we move towards other aspects of India's role in the Indian Ocean region. We will basically talking about IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association, and IONS, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. To the online students, I was taking a break, sitting in the class, that's why the mic was not open. You did not miss out on anything. All right? चलिए, लोकेश अब सुनाई दे रहा है, कुछ सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है. Because I was taking a break. I was in the class, but I was taking a break. Now let's get started on Indian Ocean. So then we have learned certain things about Indian Ocean, and then we see that generally what you will find is this pattern would be visible. India would have more partnerships with other countries. Why? Because it enhances its capabilities and it then helps India in dealing with other countries, right? So जैसे बहुत सारे देशों के साथ अब इंडिया का लॉजिस्टिक्स शेयरिंग एग्रीमेंट है. लॉजिस्टिक्स शेयरिंग इज द सिंपल नेम. So that is basically what helps India in ensuring that it grows in capability. So in Indian Ocean you have, ये देखो, this is Reunion. Reunion Island belongs to France. This is Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is a military base of US. All right. Then Singapore, China के समय भी हमने देखा था Changi base, right? US has military presence across this region. In Japan, in Philippines, in Australia. We are also seeking a logistics sharing agreement with Russia, right? China has a military base in Djibouti, but France also has a military base in Djibouti. We have cooperative arrangements with France, right? US maintains a large fleet in Bahrain. US naval fleet is located in Bahrain. So ये आपको दिखा रहा है कि generally you have other capable countries across the globe partnering with whom would be with the simple purpose of enhancing India's capability. ये जनरल पैटर्न है, ये होता रहेगा, यही हो रहा है. आई होप दिस मेक्स सेंस टू यू. बट डोंट स्टार्ट रीडिंग टू मच इनटू इट. दूसरा, कभी कभी इस तरह के टर्म्स आते हैं जैसे वनीला आइलैंड्स. So for example, few years back, the Vice President of India visited certain African countries and Indian Ocean island countries. So then, जो आप कहते हैं कि बहुत सारा फैक्ट है, फैक्ट याद करना है. जनरली फैक्ट याद नहीं करना है, जनरली आपको एक आइडिया रखना है ना. यू डोंट नीड टू रिमेंबर एग्जैक्टली एवरीथिंग. सो विच आर द वनीला आइलैंड्स. सो कभी भी अखबार जब पढ़ रहे होगे तो इस तरह का इंफॉर्मेशन भी आएगा, इस तरह के टर्म्स, वनीला आइलैंड. सो एक जनरल आइडिया तो हो सकता है ना, व्हाट इज वनीला आइलैंड, राइट? सिंपली पढ़ के. सो वनीला आइलैंड्स इज अ रेफरेंस टू सर्टेन African and Indian Ocean island countries which came together for the purpose of promoting tourism. So which are vanilla islands? Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mayotte, Reunion and Seychelles. All right, these countries are called vanilla islands because in the past there was cultivation of vanilla in this particular region. So they are known for cultivation of vanilla. But they have formed a partnership for promoting tourism, right? So the term vanilla island. So जब कोई रीजन पढ़ रहे हो तो वहाँ इस तरह के टर्म सुनने में मिलेंगे, कोई बहुत खास सिग्निफिकेंस नहीं है इसका. So now if you start finding significance in every topic, that would increase your burden. But if something like this is mentioned, remember it. So which are vanilla island countries or vanilla like islands? Which are the vanilla islands? एक बार देख लो, याद कर लो. Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius and Seychelles, these are independent countries. Mayotte and Reunion, these are territories of France, right? So France, कई लोग पूछते हैं जब इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस आया, why is France a part of international solar alliance, right? Because France has territories in the Indian Ocean region, right? Now let's move forward. Let's look at some other examples, right? When we look at any relationship, like with Mauritius, it's a small country. But why is it important? ये तो अब आपको समझ में आ गया होगा generally. From the perspective of Sagar, from the perspective of India's role as a regional security provider. So you have, ये ऐसे देश हैं जो आपको मैप में नजर भी नहीं आएंगे, all right? But they are significant because they are located in Southwest Indian Ocean region, which is a vast oceanic region without any large or major territory, right? So these kinds of countries become important for certain reasons. A, their strategic location, close to sea lanes of communication, close to वो शब्द मैं इस्तेमाल कर रहा हूँ श्रीलंका के लेक्चर से, close to trade routes, all right? And then these countries have large, vast, exclusive economic zones. Now some of these countries may have some other features also. For example, Mauritius often is in news, right? Recently there were visits from Mauritius to India. So Mauritius has a 68% population of Indian origin, all right? So that's another thing that makes Mauritius important. So these kinds of relations provide India an advantage. Strategically located country, close to sea lanes of communication, close to trade routes, but also a country which has 68% of population which is of Indian origin. So thereby you will see what we are doing with Mauritius is an example of how we are expanding our presence in the Indian Ocean region. क्या किया हमने? 2015 Prime Minister visited Mauritius, visited Seychelles, right? So when their political visit is happening, it is for certain purpose. तो इंडियन ओशन के अंदर एक जो चीज हम कर रहे हैं वो आप एग्जाम्पल क्या लिख सकते हैं? Increased number of diplomatic and political visits to Indian Ocean countries, right? Whether be it a visit to Maldives, Sri Lanka, Seychelles or Mauritius. तो ये भी हम करते हैं. चलिए. Now when we see the examples, what are we doing? So then we signed an agreement with Mauritius on what? On the development of infrastructure. Where? कहाँ? वहाँ लिखा हुआ नहीं है, पढ़ना नहीं है. I was just simply testing कि जब रिटर्न मटेरियल का इस्तेमाल हो तो आप क्या करते हैं, आप पढ़ने लगते हैं उसको। पढ़ना क्या है आपको, ये ऑलराइट, जो पढ़ने का रिटर्न प्रिंटेड मटेरियल दिया हुआ वो पढ़ना है ताकि आपको जनरली समझो। सो सी व्हाट हैव वी डन इन 2015, वी साइंड मेनी एग्रीमेंट्स। चलो, एग्रीमेंट्स रिगार्डिंग व्हाट? एग्रीमेंट्स रिगार्डिंग डेवलपमेंट ऑफ ब्लू इकोनॉमी। डिड वी सी this term coming up in Sagar approach, which means we have economic agreements with these countries, development of oceanic resources, or we have agreements for the development of infrastructure like at the Agalega Island। ये बात कर चुके हैं हम, all right? So जब आप कहते हैं कि बहुत सारा पढ़ना पड़ता है, सब याद करना पड़ता है, नहीं, जब आप एक बार पढ़ लोगे तो कुछ चीजें, क्योंकि वो चीजों का एग्जाम्पल हो जाएंगी। किन चीजों का एग्जाम्पल हो जाएंगी? How is India expanding its interest in the Indian Ocean region? We provided a naval patrol vessel named Barracuda to Mauritius। यहां पे ये एग्जांपल नहीं कि उस नेवल पेट्रोल वेसल का नाम बाराकूडा है, पर यूपीएससी में जनरली लोग समझने लगते हैं हर चीज इंपॉर्टेंट होती है, दे वुड से बाराकूडा, बट व्हाट इज इंपॉर्टेंट, व्हाट इज इट एन एग्जांपल ऑफ? है हेल्पिंग अदर कंट्रीज इन capacity building, providing them an assistance. So then you start finding examples of what is happening. And then we provided 500 million US dollars of line of credit, 500 million US dollars of line of credit for developing projects aimed at simple development projects, but also security projects, security procurement के लिए. So what is this an example of? Capacity building. ये assistance is going both for economic development plus security projects. So that is what you would start noticing in any particular relationship. Either things are an example of something which is already going on, or things are important because they are locations in which India is interested. So there may be a lot of locations, but locations where India is interested becomes important. So from the perspective of the examination, the question can be Agalega Islands recently in news is located in, all right? कहाँ located है? Mauritius, right? Let's move on. Let's look at the Agalega Islands. These are very small islands. Here India is building maritime infrastructure, right? Maritime infrastructure. So if you are reading newspaper, इस तरह की चीजें आपको देखने को मिलेंगी, all right? But again, what is important? The important thing is location wise, Agalega Islands are in Mauritius. Agalega Islands is important because India is developing a maritime infrastructure in this particular region. And largely, strategically, it is part of India's Sagar approach, part of India's approach in terms of net security provider, being a net security provider. Similarly, Seychelles. Again, you will not find this country easily on the map. बहुत छोटा सा देश है. But why is it important? Because of its strategic location in the West Indian Ocean, close to sea lanes of communication, close to trade routes, and then also important because islands have significant presence in oceanic region and they have large resource domains, exclusive economic zones, right? So roughly this is the location of the island in the region. Smaller islands dotted across this region, Seychelles as a country. So again, these islands were controlled by the Britishers, but what is significant? They are important for location. तो आप हर चीज में बैकग्राउंड ढूंढते हैं, बैकग्राउंड हर चीज का जानना जरूरी नहीं है. In 2015, Prime Minister visited this region, this country. What happened? We announced providing a Dornier aircraft to Seychelles. What is this an example of? Capacity building support. What is this largely a part of? India's Sagar approach or India's role as a net security provider. All right, we signed agreement on hydrography, renewable energy. These are economic agreements. Surveying the ocean or economic arrangements in the area of renewable energy. What is this an example of? Under the Sagar approach, we also focus on development of blue economy, economic cooperation. All right. So this is the kind of activity that you will find with these countries. We also have helped these countries, many of these countries, in development of coastal surveillance radars. So when we have coastal surveillance radars established through our help in friendly countries, what is it doing? It is enhancing the capacity of the other country, but also helping us because we have friendly relations with these countries. So it's not that we can be present everywhere, but we can have friendly relations with countries which are strategically located, and then we can cooperate in terms of information exchange. So that also adds to India's capability, right? And then we signed agreement for the development of infrastructure at the Assumption Island. So again, this is an example of India helping in capacity building, but this is also an example of India strengthening its role as a net security provider. यही होता है जब आप पढ़ते हैं तो, और ये सारी चीजें हम दोहराते रहते हैं. कहाँ दोहराया हमने? When we started talking about India's response to China, we talked about this. When we started talking about India in the Indian Ocean region, these are the examples. So some examples would become common examples, right? If you keep your mind open and flexible, some examples are simply common examples, right, of a larger phenomenon, of larger relations. So what is India doing in Indian Ocean is relevant for India's relations, India's interests, is relevant in the context of what India is doing to counter China, is important in the context of what India is doing in the larger Indo-Pacific. All right? So that is something that you should keep in mind. Now let's move forward. Let's look at Project Mosam. What is Project Mosam? Project Mosam again largely helps India in advancing its Sagar approach, right? And it is then a cultural project, right? So it also is helping in India's role as a net security provider by creating a better understanding. Countries would only accept you as a net security provider when they look at you to be a benevolent country. So it's also a matter of image, all right? You cannot simply say that, okay, we are coming, we will be deploying our forces here, don't worry, we will take care of your security needs. It would raise suspicions, because generally military is used for domination. So if you combine soft power with hard power, it becomes effective. So India also is taking certain steps which seem to be cultural but have larger strategic implications. So one of them is Project Mosam. UPSC has asked a question, what is Project Mosam? Are there any strategic aspects related with it, right? So first and foremost, we understand what is Project Mosam. Project Mosam is a project under Ministry of Culture. This project was announced in the year 2014. So some information would be important. For example, अगर आप इसको PT की तरह से देखो, so Project Mosam, initiative of Ministry of Culture, which is the nodal agency implementing it. So Archaeological Survey of India is the nodal agency. And it also is getting research support from IGNCA, right? Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. And then it was announced in 2014 at Doha during a UNESCO meeting. And the purpose is to bring together 39 Indian Ocean countries under the purview of Project Mosam for cultural engagements, cultural and historical research. That is the idea, right? That is the primary idea. It's a project aimed at historical research. So what actually happens under Project Mosam? Conferences, seminars, right? Talks about the past history of the Indian Ocean region. ये इस nature का project है ये, right? Now let's move forward. So then the project aims at doing certain things. What is it that it aims to do? It aims to explore the multifaceted Indian Ocean world. What does this mean? So आप लोग, इसलिए मैं पूछ रहा था कि क्या complex हो जाता है? ये words complex हो जाते हैं पढ़ने में, क्योंकि आप इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा मतलब निकालने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, rather than simply reading it. Multifaceted का simple dictionary मतलब भी कुछ होता होगा. Dictionary है आपके पास, रखते हैं, इस्तेमाल करते हैं. तो before the break I was getting a sense of what kind of difficulty you get in reading, right? So sometimes your difficulty comes from the fact that you are trying to understand too much. That is also a weakness in this examination. Some things have to be quickly covered rather than understanding them too much, right? क्यों? Even the topper scores around 52% of marks in this examination. 52% है ना? So 100% is not going to be there. So for those of you who find it difficult to read either the current affairs, I understand sometimes it is content heavy. Try and have the structure of that subject in mind, right? What is the nature of that subject? What is generally matter of concern? And that's why in the first class I told you, look at the question paper also. पर आपके पास इतना समय नहीं बचता कि आप क्वेश्चन पेपर देख पाए, अपना एफर्ट लगा पाए, तो फिर क्या होगा? देखो, कोचिंग दो उम्मीद से लोग आते हैं, दो तरह के लोग होते हैं, दो तरह की राय होती है. देयर आर टू काइंड्स ऑफ ओपिनियंस ऑन कोचिंग्स. वन, कोचिंग वुड डू एवरीथिंग फॉर मी बिकॉज आई हैव पेड मनी. So you are not the only one who has paid money. People with different capabilities have paid money, right? So coaching is generally not going to do everything for you. It is going to give you a time frame within which to complete things. It is going to give you a platform where you come and meet your peers. It is going to give you a direction in the terms of presence of the teacher in the class, whom you can use for addressing your doubts, right? But unless you know yourself, make your own self effort, it's not going to be useful. राइट? सो देन कौन फायदा उठा पाता है क्लासेस का? जो पहले से पढ़ के आता है कुछ. ऑल राइट, पीपल हु नो what is to be done. And second opinion is there is no point in going to coaching. I will do it on my own. So there are people who do it on their own. They can do it on their own. There is no problem there. But the doing it on your own creates the problem of organization. Are you committed enough? Are you organized enough? Are you disciplined enough? So doing on your own create another set of problems. So इसलिए आपको क्या करना है? आपको ये समझना है कि this is a tool and much of what you have to do is your own effort, right? So read difficult things, ये मैं कह रहा हूँ. And generally, you see, if you find words like these, they have simple dictionary meaning. So the project aims at exploring the multifaceted world of the Indian Ocean, meaning multiple aspects of engagements in the Indian Ocean region, right? Cultural diversity, commercial and religious interactions in the Indian Ocean region, right? Archaeological and historical research in the Indian Ocean region. That is the aim of this particular project. Promoting historical, cultural research, and then through that establishing a body of knowledge about the past of the Indian Ocean region. One of the concrete aspects of Project Mosam can be these countries can together identify sites to be named as UNESCO World Heritage Site. They can identify sites collectively, right? And then they can prescribe those sites to be named as UNESCO World Heritage Site. Right. Now, let's look at and go beyond this particular aspect. So then ultimately you will find that the UPSC says, is there a strategic aspect to it? So one thing that the Project Mosam would do is, it would establish the history of trade relations in this region, history of maritime routes in this region. And whatever conception of maritime routes you have in the Indian Ocean region, you will find India would emerge at the center. So it has strategic implications. Why? Number one, it promotes India's soft power engagement, right? By highlighting how India culturally has also been central to Indian Ocean region. Promotes soft power engagements, highlighting how India is central to cultural engagements in this region, right? Secondly, it promotes India's cooperation with multiple countries, right? Flowing from the first point itself. So now you have engagements with multiple countries. 39 countries have been identified to be part of research projects under this particular initiative, Project Mosam. So it is strengthening your diplomacy also, right? Now, thirdly, it is focusing on areas like trade and maritime linkages in the Indian Ocean region. Areas like trade and maritime linkages in the Indian Ocean region. So, history of it. Now, if you go back in the history of Indian Ocean region, you can start naming ports or locations since the Harappan civilization. जैसे लोथल, धौलावीरा, go towards southern India also. Any significant ports archaeological sites in terms of trade with the Romans? Huh? चलिए, Calicut is the modern name. Anything else? Kaveri Patnam. Anything else? Any archaeological site from where Roman coins have been found, which shows that India had ancient trade with the Romans? Huh? Chola, Chera are the dynasties. I am talking about any particular site. Arikamedu. आ से स्टार्ट है, आपको याद नहीं, चलिए कोई बात नहीं. बट यू हैव अ सेंस दैट व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट ट्रेड इन द इंडियन ओशन रीजन, मुजरिस पोर्ट, राइट? मुजरिस इज अ गुड एग्जांपल. यहाँ पे इन्होंने दिया, शीतल ने बताया मुजरिस इज व्हाट आई वाज रेफरिंग टू, राइट? सो देयर इज अ इवेंट इन कोची कॉल्ड कोची बिनाले. सुना है आपने? इट्स अ कल्चरल इवेंट होता है कोची बिनाले. तो there what we are reminding to the world is that India's connection with the Indian Ocean is old, is ancient. And why are we reminding it to the world? Because China is a new player in the town. China says that we also have a history in this region. All right? We are also reviving those historical ties. So Chinese engagement with this region is generally traced back to 15th century voyages that the Chinese undertook to the Indian Ocean region. They came to Sri Lanka, they came to Tamil Nadu coast, they came to other parts of the Indian Ocean region. So China, when it is promoting BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, it is justifying it by citing that how China also has old connections with the Indian Ocean region. But when it comes to old connections with the Indian Ocean region, India can always beat China day in, day out. All right? We can say that we have thousands of years of history in terms of engagements with the Indian Ocean region. So then project like a project Mosam is helpful in establishing the legitimacy or the lack of it in case of modern day connectivity projects like BRI. So it establishes the legitimacy of India's role in promoting connectivity in the Indian Ocean region by highlighting how India has been central to movement in the Indian Ocean region, and thereby it also challenges China's claims of older ties with the Indian Ocean region. So kabhi competition is also about ideas. How acceptable are your ideas? So people ask, why are countries accepting China's money? Because money is important. All right, you cannot deny that money is important. But then you are not crass enough to simply say that it is only about money. That's why the Chinese ambassador writes an article in the newspaper and highlights historicity, historical aspects. So historicity is on India's side in the Indian Ocean region, and you establish it by a project like Project Mosam. It strengthens India's narrative as compared to China's in the Indian Ocean region. That's why it has strategic relevance in the Indian Ocean region, right? So Project Mosam right now is active till 2023, right? It was to expire in 2020, but it has been extended till 2023. UPSC has already asked a question in mains 2015 on what is Project Mosam and are there any strategic aspects related with it? Is there any strategic significance of it, right? So this is something that you can understand. This is what happens in UPSC, but in UPSC mains examination, Project Mosam is part of India's larger Indian Ocean strategy. When you are talking about Indian Ocean, you talk about India, you also talk about China, and thereby you establish the validity of project like Project Mosam. Paper 1 में नहीं पूछा, paper 2 में पूछा. Project is project of Ministry of Culture, right? So this is one example of how topics are mixed up in UPSC. Topics are interrelated in UPSC. अभी इसकी वैल्यू क्या है? From the perspective of preliminary examination. So what will you remember? When was Project Mosam conceived, announced 2014. It is guided by which ministry? Ministry of Culture, which is the nodal agency for implementation, ASI, and research support is coming from इंदिरा गांधी नेशनल सेंटर ऑफ आर्ट्स. इतने लेवल का इंफॉर्मेशन यूपीएससी नहीं मांगता, लेकिन पहले 2-3 लेवल का कब हुआ, कौन है, ये यूपीएससी मांगता है. इन सिंपल टर्म्स गिव मी एन आइडिया व्हाट इज प्रोजेक्ट मौसम ऑल अबाउट. इन वेरी सिंपल टर्म्स, अपने मन से बताइए, बिना पढ़े, बिना लिखे, ये बिना सोचे कि कुछ परफेक्ट डेफिनेशन होगी. वन ऑफ द reasons why I have started writing in the class is to show you that you can be imperfect. You don't need to be perfect. You need to have a structure and a process in mind, right? Perfection is then a process. कि आप लंबे समय तक कोशिश करो, परफेक्ट होते रहो. What is Project Mosam all about? पढ़ लिया? बताइए. Promoting soft power of India. हाँ? Promoting connectivity. Researching the historicity of connectivity in the Indian Ocean region, maritime routes in the Indian Ocean region. But ultimately, Project Mosam is for promoting historical research. Historical research on multiple aspects of engagements in the Indian Ocean region. Cultural, commercial, religious engagements as it existed. Remember, पहली चीज हमने क्या कही थी? One of the first things, that Indian Ocean is a strategic bridge which connects diverse regions. So it is today, it was also the case in the past. So it is establishing the historicity of these engagements, thereby trying to create a common identity in the Indian Ocean region. And whenever that happens, India's centrality inevitably would come up, right? That India has been central to movements in the Indian Ocean region. So promotion of historical research, conferences. And one concrete aspect that can come out of it is collective nomination of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So for example, places like Muziris, which was a hub of maritime trade, right? So that can be identified. Question kaisa pucha? Project Mosam is considered a unique foreign policy initiative of Indian government to improve relationship with its neighbors. Does the project have a strategic dimension? Discuss. Right? So in this kind of question, what will you do? Part, description of the project. What is Project Mosam? Who operates it? When was it launched? What is the objective? And part, analysis. Strategic implications of it, strategic dimensions of it. Indian Ocean, India, China, India's relations with other countries in the Indian Ocean, BRI as a connectivity project, laying claims to legitimacy, going back in past, and then India establishing its centrality in the connections in the Indian Ocean region. ये एक एग्जाम्पल है कॉम्प्लेक्स क्वेश्चन का, जो देखने में कॉम्प्लेक्स लगता है, बट अल्टीमेटली इट हैज अ फैक्चुअल पार्ट एंड इट हैज अ एनालिटिकल पार्ट. आंसर कर लेंगे इसका? कर लेंगे? कोशिश करना है ना, नोट कर लो क्वेश्चन, या फिर क्योंकि आप तो क्वेश्चन पेपर देखते नहीं है, तो नोट कर लो एक बार क्वेश्चन. प्रोजेक्ट मौसम इज कंसिडर्ड अ यूनिक फॉरेन पॉलिसी इनिशिएटिव ऑफ इंडियन गवर्नमेंट टू इंप्रूव रिलेशनशिप विद इट्स नेबर्स. डज द प्रोजेक्ट हैव अ स्ट्रेटेजिक डायमेंशन? राइट? इन रिसेंट ईयर्स यूपीएससी ने मेंस में इंडियन ओशन से यही क्वेश्चन पूछा है, राइट? सो फ्रॉम रिसेंट ईयर्स यू डोंट हैव एनी अदर एग्जाम्पल, बट दिस इज द एग्जाम्पल, एंड दिस इज द एग्जाम्पल वेयर इंडियन ओशन इज नो वेयर मेंशन्ड इन द क्वेश्चन, राइट? बट अल्टीमेटली इट इज अ क्वेश्चन अबाउट इंडियन ओशन in India's foreign policy. Smart students would start using Sagar, net security provider, terms like that in the answer, because now you have understood what is India's approach, what is India's role, right? So a smart answer would be a combination of what the question has asked, but also framing it within the larger strategic perspective of India's approach and role in the Indian Ocean region, and how Project Mosam then promotes either Sagar or promotes India's role as a net security provider, right? तो लिटरल मतलब चीजों का नहीं लेना चाहिए. डेवलप अ फ्रेमवर्क एंड ट्राई एंड अंडरस्टैंड देम. नोट कर लिया ये क्वेश्चन आपने? राइट. सो समटाइम्स ट्राई एंड राइट आंसर्स टू यूपीएससी क्वेश्चंस बिकॉज it gives you an idea of how do you write, how do you approach the question, then your doubts would stop becoming vague and would become concrete, right? Once you know your style. Unless you know your style, आपके doubts हमेशा vague रहेंगे. ये कर सकते हैं क्या, वो कर सकते हैं क्या. मेरा आंसर हमेशा इन सब पे ये होगा कि बिल्कुल कर सकते हैं. I don't question your capability, all right? I don't question your capability, but then first apply it, right? And then come and ask a question. So ये एक अच्छा तरीका होगा. चलिए अब दूसरे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के बारे में बात कर लेते हैं. अगेन लार्जली अंडरस्टूड, पार्ट ऑफ व्हाट इंडिया वांट्स टू डू अंडर सागर, पार्ट ऑफ प्रमोटिंग रीजनल कोऑपरेशन इन द इंडियन ओशन रीजन. सो इंडियन ओशन रिम एसोसिएशन is the only regional organization which is based on an Indian Ocean identity. It is the only regional organization which comprises countries of the Indian Ocean basin. So it is the most comprehensive regional organization in the or promoting cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. ये हो गया IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. अब थोड़ा सा इसका ग्रोथ देख लेते हैं कैसे हुआ. तो बहुत सिंपल है. नेल्सन मंडेला केम टू इंडिया इन 1995. नेल्सन मंडेला नाम सुना है आपने? राइट. So Nelson Mandela is also one of the individuals who have been awarded the Bharat Ratna, right? Among the few foreigners who have been awarded the Bharat Ratna. Who is the other person? Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan or the Frontier Gandhi? Chaliye, you have some sense of history. So Nelson Mandela came to India. Nelson Mandela gave a speech. In the speech he says that geographically, culturally, the Indian Ocean connects diverse regions, diverse people. This idea should be transformed into an idea of economic cooperation, right? So he proposed that Indian Ocean region should come up with a regional initiative. So then you have the development of the Indian Ocean Rim Initiative, all right? And then gradually this becomes in 1997 Indian Ocean Rim Association, initially known as IORARC, right? And then gradually in 2013 the name changed to Indian Ocean Rim Association. That is the history. So ultimately it's a regional organization promoting cooperation among countries of the Indian Ocean. What kind of cooperation? Socio-economic political cooperation, not necessarily security cooperation, right? Socio-economic political cooperation is the aim. And in recent times, one of the clearest objectives of the IORA is to develop cooperation in blue economy. All right, so widest form of cooperation defined as promoting the idea of blue economy. So some details about this organization. It has 23 members, 23 member states and 10 dialogue partners. Keeps on changing, but 23 member states as of now, right? So for example, we will remember that Pakistan is not a member of IORA, and we will remember that France is a member of IORA. So again, let me give you a small tip. When an organization has 10 or less members, it can be reasonably expected that you remember all of them, है ना? जैसे अब सार्क के सारे मेंबर्स आपको याद होने चाहिए, क्योंकि एक तो क्लोज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, देश के पास है, और दूसरा 10 से कम है. But as you see larger groupings, more than 10 members, the expectation, reasonable expectation is not that you will remember all of them. So then you try and notice, are there any peculiar things about the membership that you can remember, right? So Pakistan is not a member, France is a member. So you generally find questions like एक आपको list दे देगा, right? Which among the following group of countries are members of IORA? So it will give you a list. In one, 4 options would be there, right? In one, France would be there, and in one, Pakistan would be there. So wherever Pakistan is there, it helps you in elimination. Wherever France is there, it helps you in selection. All right. So basically, that is what happens when you move further in the process of preparation. You stop taking things literally. कि ये जो सारा पेज पे लिखा हुआ है सब important है. तो कुछ लोगों के notes, for example, in my college, I borrowed the notes of my senior, thinking that that would be helpful. It was not helpful because I later realized that my senior had a habit of writing everything that was there in the book. So rather than reading his notes, I could have read the book. ये हो सकता था. तो धीरे धीरे आप क्या करते हैं, जैसे मैंने आपको एक क्लास में पहले भी बताया था, प्रोग्रेसिवली आपका जो साइज है ना रिटेन करने का वो कम होता जाता है. Right? You don't retain a lot of things, but you retain the most important things, but because you start identifying patterns. Now, the Secretariat of the Indian Ocean Rim Association is where? Mauritius, Ebene. Now, this would be a simple information that you will be able to remember. If not Ebene, at least you will remember Mauritius. All right. So, UPSC generally would ask questions at the level of Mauritius. Where is it located? The headquarters is located. It would not necessarily be interested in that you remember Ebene. So, कुछ चीजें जैसे ऑनलाइन कहा कुछ स्टूडेंट्स ने कि हैव टू बी रोट लर्न. यस, सम थिंग्स हैव टू बी रोट लर्न. डिफिकल्ट थिंग्स हैव टू बी रोट लर्न. जो आप याद नहीं कर सकते, दैट हैज टू बी रोट लर्न. But certain things, by the value of repetition itself, starts getting consolidated. Right? The more you repeat, the more it becomes consolidated. The more you practice, you identify ways of solving questions. Where exactly is the decision making in Indian Ocean Rim Association? Generally, Indian Ocean Rim Association meets through foreign ministers. So, Council of Foreign Ministers is where these decisions are taken. That is the regular meeting. जरूरी नहीं आप ये याद करें. Right? Sometimes what is expected is which country chairs the particular grouping. Right? Now, UAE chaired the grouping from 2019 to 2021. Current chair of Indian Ocean Rim Association is Bangladesh. Current chair is Bangladesh. Previous chair was UAE. The current chair, Bangladesh. So, Bangladesh would be leading the IORA till mid 2023. And then you would have a new chair. So, whosoever is the chair hosts the meeting of IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. And then after that, you have various others level of meetings like working groups of officials. But generally, this is what is important about IRA, that it was formed in 1997. Its headquarters is in Ebene, Mauritius. Its highest level of decision making or meetings is Council of Foreign Ministers. That is what you need to know. And then another layer of information, who is the current chair. So the last chair was UAE, current chair is Bangladesh. That's it. So gradually you start moving it down. And what is the limitation of the IORA? So generally the limitation is said to be it lacks a mechanism like a summit system. Its highest level of meeting generally is meeting of foreign ministers. So lacks a summit, lacks a leadership level approach. B, it lacks focus. Right? It lacks focus in the sense that it generally has lacked a driver of growth in cooperation. Like for example, a group of countries which are interested in making this organization successful. Why is that? Because this organization by nature is very diverse. Because who are the members? Countries from Africa, countries from West Asia, countries from South Asia, countries from Southeast Asia. So meaning they have their own regional focuses. And thereby the IORA gets secondary focus or becomes secondary in their regional choice, right? So it has lacked focus and it has lacked resources. Resources like funding mechanism for implementation of programs, right? So that is basically the criticism of Indian Ocean Rim Association. Let's move forward and let's simply, as I had said, remember some of the history. Nelson Mandela coming to India, 1995, and 1995 he gave the idea. So Indian Ocean Rim Initiative comes into existence in 1995. So some history. 1995, what is it called? Indian Ocean Rim initiative. उसके बाद then a full-fledged regional organization, Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, IOR ARC is created. All right, and then इतना मुश्किल नाम है इंडियन ओशन रिम एसोसिएशन फॉर रीजनल कोऑपरेशन, तो उसको सिंप्लीफाई कर दिया 2013 में, इट बिकेम इंडियन ओशन रिम एसोसिएशन. राइट, सो फ्रॉम हिस्ट्री इफ यूपीएससी वांट्स टू मेक इट डिफिकल्ट, it would add these kinds of information, right? Secondary, tertiary level of information, right? That consider the following statements about Indian Ocean Rim Association. But you don't only prepare for difficult questions in this examination. Most of the questions in this examination would fall on the easier side, right? So that's where you read, but you know that certain things have to be remembered. वो नहीं भूलना है आपको, बाकी कुछ चीजें आप भूल सकते हैं. You are allowed to forget things. All right? And then certain special facts. For example, IORA so far has had only one summit. 2017, 20 years of completion of IORA was celebrated with the leaders level meeting, which was hosted in Indonesia. All right, which was hosted by Indonesia. So again, this is one organization, as we have learned, India would need to focus on in order to promote its Sagar approach or in order to strengthen its approach as a net security provider. क्यों? 1-to-1 अप्रोच बहुत सारे देशों के प्रति आपका है, लेकिन यहाँ पे कितने मेंबर्स हैं? 23 members. So it is covering the entirety of Indian Ocean region in one organization, one grouping, and India historically is associated with this organization, helping in its formation. So that is something that you will remember. And then you see that this is something that is happening. So when India chaired the Indian Ocean Rim Association, it developed a certain focus in terms of areas of cooperation. So what are the focus areas of cooperation? Maritime security and safety, trade and investment facilitation, fisheries management, disaster risk management, tourism and cultural exchanges, academic and science and technology, cooperation, blue economy, women's economic empowerment. Very diffused focus, but still generally you will see what kind of cooperation? Trade, economy, disaster management, social aspects like gender empowerment, and overall everything can be clubbed under the idea of cooperation in blue economy. So there may be many areas of focus, but ultimately any organization may be important. Chinta mat karo, I will share this with you as well, but you also have some mention of it in your content as well, right? So that is the focus. You don't need to remember everything here, but you need to simply understand what kind of organization it is. And then Indian Ocean Rim Association primarily promotes dialogue. So then you have certain initiatives of Indian Ocean Rim Association which are in news, especially when India hosts them. So IOD is Indian Ocean Dialogue. All right, Indian Ocean Dialogue. Indian Ocean Dialogue is a Track 1.5 initiative. क्या है Track 1.5 initiative? What is a Track 1.5 initiative or Track 1.5 diplomacy? We have talked about it in the first class itself. Track 1 diplomacy, when the engagement is between officials. All right? When officials engage, it is called Track 1 diplomacy. सुन लो कम से कम मेरी बात पढ़ने की बजाय. Right? It's like when I was a child, I always loved books which had pictures and colors. Right? So that is what is attracting you. It's also an experiment in teaching. But when you become old and adults, you should have the ability to work through boring and simple, dense things also, right? So सुन लीजिए आप मेरी बात. Indian Ocean Dialogue is a Track 1.5 initiative of Indian Ocean Rim Association. What is Track 1.5 initiative or Track 1.5 diplomacy? सुना है कभी आपने? नहीं सुना है? कभी नहीं सुना है? सुना ही नहीं है? सुना भी नहीं है? सुना है. Right. So, number one, Track 1 diplomacy is always डिप्लोमेटिक मैकेनिज्म इन्वॉल्विंग ऑफिशियल्स और ऑफिशियल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स, जैसे आपके आईएफएस, मिनिस्टर ऑफ एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स, मिनिस्टर ऑफ एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स, और गवर्नमेंट्स टॉकिंग विद ईच अदर, ऑफिशियल रिप्रेजेंटेशन. ट्रैक 2 डिप्लोमेसी, अनऑफिशियल रिप्रेजेंटेशन, जैसे डायलॉग बिटवीन सिविल सोसाइटी, ऑल राइट, डायलॉग बिटवीन सिविल सोसाइटी और स्टूडेंट एक्सचेंजेस, और इवन टूरिज्म, diplomacy led by people, all right, that would be called track 2 form of diplomacy. Primary distinction, unofficial level of representation, you don't have official representation there, but it is also engagement between two countries or two societies. And track 1.5, track 1, track 2, so track 1.5 क्या हुआ? A combination of these two, both official and unofficial representation. So you would have various examples. For example, you have Nimrana dialogue. Nimrana dialogue सुना है आपने? Nimrana is a place where a Nimrana dialogue takes place. So it is organized by always partnership between a think tank and Ministry of External Affairs. Most important example, is there any dialogue that India hosts जो आपने सुना हो? Raisina dialogue. Raisina dialogue has been in news over the last few years. Raisina dialogue is hosted by Ministry of External Affairs plus Observer Research Foundation, ORF. So that becomes track 1.5. सरकारी एक पार्टनर हो और एक पार्टनर कौन हो? गैर सरकारी. ऑल राइट, ऑफिशियल एज वेल एज नॉन ऑफिशियल एंगेजमेंट. तो ये ट्रैक 1.5 है, राइट. ट्रैक 1, ट्रैक 2, ट्रैक 1.5 डिप्लोमेसी इनिशिएटिव इसको कहते हैं. अब जवाब दे लेंगे आप. और बाकी होता है सीक्रेट निगोसिएशंस, बैक चैनल निगोसिएशंस, ये भी लोग पूछते हैं. तो ये बाय डेफिनेशन बैक चैनल है, मतलब पर्दे के पीछे हो रहा है ना. तो दीज आर सीक्रेट निगोसिएशंस, उसके बारे में हमको ज्यादा चिंता करने की जरूरत नहीं है. वो कहाँ हो रहा है, कैसे हो रहा है, किसके बीच में हो रहा है, उसका आउटकम ही पता चलता है बस, राइट. सो नाउ दिस इज द ट्रैक 1.5 इनिशिएटिव ऑफ Indian Ocean Rim Association, all right, IOD, which means what? This is a way of Indian Ocean Rim Association promoting regional understanding by inviting major stakeholders, governments as well as civil society agents, university, academias, think tanks, and generally इनका purpose क्या होता है? To generate ideas, right? Now, then you will remember that first Indian Ocean dialogue was held by India in Kerala first and in India. So that is important to remember, followed by Perth, Australia, or followed by Padang in Indonesia. Not very important, but when India is holding something, it is important, and especially if it is first. So first Indian Ocean dialogue, 2014, India, right? Now some idea about what happens here. Discussions include far-ranging topics such as economic cooperation, maritime safety, security, blue economy, human assistance, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. ये याद करने की जरूरत है आपको? आपको क्या लगता है, ये याद करने की जरूरत है? नहीं, ये जनरल पर्पस है. बहुत सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का नेचर क्या होता है? जनरल होता है. बहुत सारी चीजों में कोऑपरेशन करना चाहते हैं, तो ये रिपीट होने लगता है. क्या हो रहा है यहाँ पे, राइट? नाउ इन 2019 इंडिया होस्टेड the 6th Indian Ocean Dialogue. So most recent one, all right, most recent one physically hosted in recent times, and that was also in India, 2019, 6th Indian Ocean Dialogue, right? So India ka association, 2014 first, 2019 6th Indian Ocean Dialogue. Now sometimes when UPSC wants to make it difficult, what would it do? It would ask you to remember the theme, but बहुत कम क्वेश्चन होते हैं ऐसे, बहुत ज़्यादा क्वेश्चन ऐसे नहीं होते, राइट. सो अगर डराना हो तो मैं बोलूंगा सब याद करो, सब पढ़ो, बट जनरली ऐसा होता नहीं है. बट इफ यूपीएससी वांट्स टू मेक इट डिफिकल्ट, फ्रॉम द करंट अफेयर्स इट वुड आस्क व्हाट वाज द थीम ऑफ दिस ईयर्स इंडियन ओशन डायलॉग होस्टेड बाय इंडिया, इंडो पैसिफिक रीइमेजिनिंग द इंडियन ओशन थ्रू एन एक्सपैंडेड जियोग्राफी. मीनिंग इवन at IORA we are talking about certain aspects of foreign policy, certain aspects of interest which go beyond Indian Ocean. So Indo-Pacific, reimagining the Indian Ocean through an expanded geography. That was the theme. At one level, it gives you an idea, broader idea of what is happening at Indian Ocean Dialogue. Generation of ideas. We are talking about ideas, right? तो आप बहुत ज़्यादा closely, seriously, दिल पे लेके चीज़ें
पढ़ना थोड़ा कम कर दोगे, जैसे हर चीज़ को दिल पे ले लिया, हर चीज़ को बहुत सीरियसली ले लिया, ये ज़रूरी नहीं है. Seventh Indian Ocean Dialogue took place in 2021. UAE was the chair. It hosted it. And then what was the theme? Fostering a new era of cooperation in the Indian Ocean. And that was in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. It is generally simply few things, whenever they come in news, they would be important. When Indian Ocean Dialogue is being hosted by India in any particular year, you would also be reminded of this. You would also be reminded of the theme. एंड करंट अफेयर्स पढ़ने का यही मतलब है कि आपको उस साल की चीज़ याद है. अब ये ज़रूरी नहीं है आपको हर साल के लिए ये याद रहे, बट आपको लगातार क्या याद है? इंडियन ओशन डायलॉग इज अ डायलॉग प्रमोटेड बाय IORA. ये तो भूलोगे नहीं अब, है ना? IORA, इंडियन ओशन रिम एसोसिएशन. व्हाट इज द नेचर? व्हाट इज द नेचर? इट इज अ ट्रैक 1.5 initiative. So these are two fundamental things. Rest are matter of current affairs. समझ में आ गई बात? एक और फंडामेंटल चीज क्या? फर्स्ट इंडियन ओशन डायलॉग टुक प्लेस इन 2014. बस 3 चीजें याद रखनी है और 3 चीजें रटनी नहीं है, बस सिंपली रिपीट करोगे याद हो जाएगी. और जो करंट अफेयर्स में हो रहा है वो इस तरह का एडिशन होगा, राइट? तो जस्ट टू गिव यू एन आइडिया. नाउ लेट्स लुक एट द क्वेश्चन. लेट्स लुक एट द क्वेश्चन. दिस इज द क्वेश्चन दैट UPSC आस्क्ड. अब सोचो क्या जवाब दे पाओगे इसका on the basis of the information that we have used. UPSC क्वेश्चन क्या है? सभी सो गए हैं? प्लीज वेक अप, प्लीज वेक अप. With reference to Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, consider the following statements. It was established very recently in response to incidents of piracy and accidents of oil spills. आप बहुत ही स्पेसिफिक इंफॉर्मेशन, इन्फोग्राफिक सब पे ध्यान दे रहे थे, है ना? वो जो एक मैंने दिखाया था आपको कि 25-26 पर्पज हैं उसके. UPSC क्या पूछ रहा है आपसे, वो ध्यान दे लो. It was established very recently in response to incidents of piracy and accidents of oil spills. It is an alliance meant for maritime security only. क्या है, क्या ऑप्शन है फिर? D, neither 1 nor 2. कितना मुश्किल था इसको आंसर करना? On the basis of general information and on the basis of reading the statement, it became easier for you to answer. यही ना? So UPSC जो करता है वो भी देख लो, rather than अपने दिमाग में क्वेश्चन जो बनाते रहते हो, what if ये हो गया तो और वो हो गया तो, ऐसे प्रिपरेशन नहीं होती है. So all of you online also, Isha, Saswat, Astha, Shivam, Soumya, all of you have given the right answer. In the class also everyone gave the right answer. But जब टेस्ट कर रहे हो, पेपर देख रहे हो, तो पर्पस केवल राइट आंसर दे के अपनी पीठ थपथपाना नहीं होता है कि बहुत बढ़िया मैंने आंसर कर दिया. पर्पस ये होता है कि अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट इज UPSC आस्किंग यू. फर्स्ट, इट वाज एस्टैब्लिश्ड वेरी रिसेंटली. कभी कभी आपको मिलेगा वेग टर्मिनोलॉजी. वेरी रिसेंटली का क्या मतलब होता है? To incidents of piracy and accidents of oil spill. So very recently ने आपको एक hint दे दिया, that very vague assertion, so may be wrong. Then उसके बाद in response to piracy and accidents of oil spills, ये हमको पढ़ने से पता चल गया कि ऐसा तो है नहीं, right? It is an alliance meant for maritime security only. कभी कभी यूनिवर्सल जो इस्तेमाल होता है वो आपको एक हिंट देने के लिए होता है, राइट? अब UPSC क्या करेगा ये मुझे नहीं पता. आई डोंट नो व्हाट इट वुड आस्क, आई डोंट नो व्हाट इट वुड डू नेक्स्ट, बट आई नो व्हाट इट हैज डन इन द पास्ट. सो द प्रिपरेशन कैन ओनली बी ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ व्हाट यू नो, व्हाट यू आर सर्टेन ऑफ. व्हाट इफ क्या हो जाएगा? फियर ऑफ मिसिंग आउट, फोमो, या जॉय ऑफ मिसिंग आउट, जोमो. these may be interesting things to discuss. डर लगता है, याद नहीं होता है, ये बहुत ही वेग असर्शंस हैं. कॉन्क्रीट बनाओ. मेक योर कॉन्क्रीट एंड योर होप्स, बोथ ऑफ देम. मेक योर होप्स एंड फियर्स बोथ कॉन्क्रीट, है ना? अननेसेसरली डोंट फियर थिंग्स एंड अननेसेसरली डोंट बी होपफुल, राइट? बी रियलिस्टिक, मेक थिंग्स कॉन्क्रीट. ये एक क्वेश्चन का एग्जाम्पल. दूसरा जो किसी ने ऑनलाइन पूछा हुआ है, सर कैन देयर बी अ क्वेश्चन ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स को भी साथ में लेके चलते हैं. Sir, is it like there has been only one summit in 2017 and 20 years and multiple dialogues? Yes. Others, you are correct. Generally, IORA functions at the level of Foreign Ministers Council, right? Only one summit, meaning one commemorative summit meeting of leaders took place in 2017, and there are multiple dialogues, right? Now, there is another question asked by Sharanveer. Sir, do we need to focus thoroughly like land border country on these small countries of for mains, including all aspects of relationship? Smaller countries, as I've told you, neighbors, we focused on all aspects of relationship because they are our neighbors, most immediate. Reasonably expect किया जा सकता है कि आपको कम से कम अपने neighbors के बारे में पता हो. Reasonableness is the test. So countries of the neighborhood, all aspects of relationship, and then after that only important countries, all aspects of relationship, only important countries. And then smaller countries in terms of when visit happened, what kind of agreement was signed. Does it fit into India's Indian Ocean strategy? Does it fit into India's Sagar? Does it fit into any of other policies of India, right? So other countries, smaller countries generally then are not of focus in terms of all aspects of relations. But something has happened, it may become an example of something else. ये करने की आपको ज़रूरत है. और then there is another question asked by another student, which is about can there be a question on Indian Ocean Rim Association in the mains examination about its limitations? Yes, there can be. Very much there can be. So far it has not been there. So there can be. Right. Let's move forward. Let's look at IONS. But largely remember, IORA, IONS, we are looking at examples of something. Right. So what is IONS? It is another collective effort of India to promote cooperation, but this is for specific purpose. This is for naval dialogue. All right. So IONS, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Some of you may also ask what is the meaning of a symposium. I would say look at the dictionary. A symposium is a conference or a meeting of experts where they discuss ideas. आपने भी अपने स्कूल कॉलेज में सेमिनार्स कॉलेज में किया होगा, कभी सेमिनार किया है, सेमिनार अटेंड किया है. तो सेमिनार में क्या होता है, कॉन्फ्रेंस में क्या होता है, पीपल कम रीड पेपर्स, डिस्कस पेपर्स एटसेट्रा. सो दैट इज द काइंड ऑफ mechanism that IONS is. Now I will give you credit if you can tell me, is INS or was INS in news this year? Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, was it in news this year? I will give you credit for that. है ना? Was IONS in news this year? Indian Ocean Naval Symposium ने कुछ ऐसा किया जिसके कारण वो न्यूज में था. In the month of March, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium held its first exercise. All right, first exercise, right? IONS ने पहली exercise hold की. अब देखते हैं जरा what is IONS. So then ये थोड़ा ध्यान देना है ना, पहली दो लाइनें और उसके बाद भूल जाना. पढ़ो, क्लास मटेरियल में होगा तो पढ़ा होगा, यहां पढ़ लो. Indian Ocean Naval Symposium is a voluntary initiative, right, to increase maritime cooperation among navies of the littoral states of the Indian Ocean region. Littoral matlab coastal states, right? And generally it's a voluntary initiative. If you want to participate, you can participate. There is no concrete or formal binding basis for it, right? So voluntary initiative that seeks to increase maritime cooperation among navies of littoral states by providing an open and inclusive forum for discussion of regionally relevant maritime issues. So in simple terms, you may have a general idea of what IONS does. It provides a platform for naval professionals to come together to discuss issues, exchange ideas. So generation of ideas is what is happening. There may be issues in the region, in the larger region, different navies may have different views on them. Now you are allowing naval professionals to meet and discuss these ideas. So that is what is happening. It's a conference of naval professionals, right? Now then certain details. So for example, what is it, people ask what is it that happens here? I have told you it by speaking verbally. generate a flow of information between naval professionals that would lead to common understanding and possibly cause cooperative solutions on the way ahead. That is what is happening. They are discussing issues. From this discussion, a newer understanding may arise, or solutions may arise. Solutions then may become policies of countries, right? So that is something that is happening here. Now about the history of it. The first Indian Ocean Naval Symposium was initiated by India in 2008. India started this symposium, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, 2008. And generally what you would see is, this is driven by multiple meetings, but most important meeting is Conclave of Chiefs, which is Chief of the Naval Staff meeting each other. So Conclave of Chiefs is the meeting that takes place. 2008 first IONS Indian Ocean Naval Symposium was hosted by India first, right? And subsequently many countries have led it, right? So UAE 2010, South Africa 2012, Australia 14, Bangladesh 16, Iran 2018, 2020 IONS chairmanship rotated to France, and 2022 now the IONS is chaired by Thailand. All right. So then whichever country is the chair would be coordinating the meeting. IONS does not have a headquarter, right? That's why it is a voluntary initiative. So IONS generally meets through these kinds of conclaves of the chiefs, and then the IONS symposium, main symposium itself, chaired by countries which are members of this grouping. So how many navies are represented in IONS? Any general idea? Any general idea? IONS has 36 participating navies. All right, 36 participating navies are there in IONS. So Shashwat Mishra says IMEX 2022. IMEX 2022 is the name of the exercise. Be that as it may. Now you have started understanding. So again I will emphasize. Here you read, but you remember what? Where did it start? If it is in India, it is more important. So India started the IONS, and which is the latest country where it was hosted the latest? Thailand is leading it, right? Now what has happened is, it has come to define its role. What kind of cooperation, what kind of ideas would be discussed? So it gives you a concrete idea, right? It gives you a concrete idea. So IONS has divided its work in certain working groups. So what kind of ideas are discussed? You get a sense through these. IONS working groups have been working together in the area of HADR, Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief, meaning discussions on what kind of disasters are possible, what kind of operations would be required. Maritime security. Maritime security generally refers to security of the oceans in the context of global trade routes, sea lanes of communication, secured against various threats. Maritime security and information sharing and interoperability. So these are the three areas in which IONS exchanges views. What are the three areas? HADR, Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief, General Maritime Security, and interoperability as well as information sharing. How do we develop mechanisms for this? And remember, only discussions happen at this forum. Only ideas are exchanged. So don't go searching for anything more here. But you can largely put it as a part of how India is fulfilling its role of net security provider by promoting this kind of collaboration. All right? It is helpful in promoting India's Sagar approach. ऐसा तो आप समझ सकते हैं. Simple idea इससे. And three areas of work where discussion is taking place. Right? So basic information हो गई. Now the running information. Right? Running information meaning what has been happening in recent times. So Indian Navy chaired it for the first 2 years, 2008 to 2010, and then subsequently it has been rotating. India also hosted a 10-year anniversary of the IONS. जब भी कोई कंटेंट पढ़ोगे, कोई इन्फॉर्मेशन दे रहा होगा आपको किसी भी वेबसाइट पे, किसी भी प्लेटफॉर्म पे, यही सब दे रहा होगा. Is it necessary to remember? No. Beyond certain information, it is not necessary to remember information. right? You will find information like this. IONS has been chaired by UAE after India, all right? So you may make a sense कि after India, immediately after India, we may try and remember. But beyond that, Australia, Bangladesh, Iran, etc., not necessary, right? And then France and then Thailand, right? 2021, the IONS meeting took place at Reunion Island because France was the chair. So ये जब information आपके पास आ रही है तो consolidate क्या हो रहा है? There is something called Reunion Island. Reunion Island is in the Indian Ocean and it is the territory of France, right? It is not necessary that UPSC may ask कि ये कहाँ पे हुआ था. If it asks, you have the direct information. If it doesn't, then you realize what is important. Location and where is it located. So thereby just look at this question of UPSC, the question that UPSC has asked. To just make sense of क्या सवाल पूछते हैं, क्या कैसे जवाब आता है. Consider the following in respect of Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Inaugural IAS मतलब पहला IONS, first IONS was held in India in 2015 under the chairmanship of Indian Navy. ये आपने कह दिया, but do you notice that तीन information है. Held in India 2015 inaugural, all right. अब obviously INS है तो Indian Navy ही होस्ट कर रही है, ऑल राइट. थोड़ा अगर आपको पता है इसके बारे में, तीन इंफॉर्मेशन है. सो एनी यूपीएससी क्वेश्चन इफ इट हैज स्टेटमेंट लाइक दिस मे हैव दीज थ्री इंफॉर्मेशन, राइट. सो वन इंफॉर्मेशन मे बी राइट, इनॉग्रल, हेल्ड इन इंडिया. टू इंफॉर्मेशन इज राइट, थर्ड इंफॉर्मेशन इज रॉन्ग. So generally you understand the structure of the options also when you are practicing. इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि यही करने लगो, but when you are looking at a question, appreciate this also, that ultimately if you don't know the first information, you may not know the second information, you may know the third information. कुछ तो पता होगा आपको, तो कुछ तो पता होगा कि बेसिस पे बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन आंसर हो सकते हैं, right? If you have truly understood what preparing for UPSC is all about. Uncertainty is there, but the more logical you can make it for yourself is what the game is. मैं क्या समझाऊंगा और क्या समझाएंगे, this is a different matter. But how logical is it to you? आपको कितना logical लग रहा है? So you have to make it logical till you are writing the examination. Make your own assessment. IONS, second statement, IONS is a voluntary initiative that seeks to increase maritime cooperation among navies of the littoral states of the Indian Ocean region. एक जनरल स्टेटमेंट पढ़ा, वो याद करने की भी जरूरत नहीं, इसमें कुछ ऑब्वियसली गलत नहीं है, राइट. देयर इज नथिंग ऑब्वियसली रॉन्ग विद दिस ऑप्शन. तो यहां पे आपने आंसर चुन लिया, विच इज व्हाट, बी, टू ओनली. अब तीसरा एक हो सकता है, विच ऑफ द अबव स्टेटमेंट्स इज आर नॉट करेक्ट. तीसरे लेवल पे यूपीएससी may complicate it by doing this. So your mind is in the habit of answering is are correct, और आप हमेशा एक जल्दी में रहते हो केबीसी का आंसर देने की कि मुझे पता है. तो यूपीएससी ये पूछ रहा है क्या पता है वो मत बताओ, इनमें से क्या गलत है वो बताओ. सो देन द अदर लेवल ऑफ मिस्टेक दैट पीपल मेक इज नॉट रीडिंग दिस एंड स्ट्रेट गोइंग. तो यूपीएससी ने आपको सारे तरह के ऑप्शन दे रखे हैं. नॉट करेक्ट के लिए आंसर चेंज हो गया, यूपीएससी ने वो ऑप्शन दिया हुआ है, ऑल राइट. और करेक्ट के लिए बी, यूपीएससी ने वो भी ऑप्शन आपको दिया हुआ है. आपका दिमाग हमेशा करेक्ट ढूंढता है, राइट. इट ट्राइज टू फाइंड व्हाट इज करेक्ट. आई नो, राइट. सो दैट्स व्हाई यू मिस आउट दीज काइंड्स ऑफ डायरेक्टिव्स. अगर ऐसा होता क्वेश्चन तो दैट्स व्हाई द मिस्टेक दैट यू वुड हैव मेड इज नॉट ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ क्या आपको पता है क्या नहीं पता है. द मिस्टेक दैट यू मेक इज हियर, राइट. यू फॉरगॉट टू read the directive clearly and thereby you made a wrong choice. You knew the answer on the basis of information, but you made a mistake क्योंकि आपने केवल यूपीएससी के एग्जाम को इंफॉर्मेशन का एग्जाम बना लिया, राइट. दैट आई ओनली हैव टू रिमेंबर द इंफॉर्मेशन rather than these kinds of aspects. So this is called exam awareness, right. एक होता है content awareness, that you are aware of the content, that is what is done in the class, but then there is something also called exam awareness. The more you develop it, the better it is for you. All of you have answered B. Congratulations, all of you have passed the examination मेरे perspective से. But my suggestion is, not purpose, my suggestion is थोड़ा मैकेनिकल होना कम करो. You are all adults. If somebody has told you something, it may have multiple implications. Those implications have to be found out by you. Some things are told to you in as much clarity as possible, but उसके बाद आपका effort लगता है. This is the end of today's class. We have virtually ended Indian Ocean here, India's engagement with the Indian Ocean. And now in the next class, we will be mainly talking about Indo-Pacific. If there are some aspects of Indian Ocean remaining, we will start from there, but generally we will move to the Indo-Pacific. That is what we will be doing in the next class.